بالسعادة. السيدات والسادة حضور المؤتمر ومن يتابعوننا من خلف الشاشات. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. نرحب بكم مجددا في الجلسة الأولى لهذا اليوم بعنوان تقويم نواتج التعلم في التعليم العالي. يدير الجلسة معالي الدكتورة إيناس العيسى رئيس جامعة الأميرة نورة بنت عبد الرحمن. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you again to the first thematic session today, entitled Assessment of Learning Outcomes in Tertiary Education, moderated by Her Excellency Dr. Einas Al-Isa. فلتتفضل معاليكم مشكورة. Please welcome Her Excellency.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to moderate the fourth session in this conference, and I would like to welcome the viewers joining us from all over the world. The relevance of and the role that is played by higher education in economic development cannot be undermined. And throughout the years, the assessment of learning outcomes have become an emerging topic of discussion all over the world. So it is my pleasure today to be joined by world-renowned experts that are going to talk about the differentiation and the evolution of assessment of learning outcomes around the world. We have two speakers from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We have His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Alsudairy, and on his behalf, the Deputy Minister, Dr. Abdulrahman will be speaking about the transformation of higher education assessment in Saudi Arabia. We have from Paris, Dr. Dirk Van Damme, head of the OECD Innovation and Measuring Progress Division. We have from Italy, Dr. Alberto Ciolfi, the head of self-assessment and periodic evaluation accreditation from the Italian National Agency for the Evaluation of Universities and Research Institutes. And we have from Portugal, Dr. Pedro Teixeira, the director of the Center for Research in Higher Education Policies and professor at the Faculty of Economics at the University of Porto. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sohail Bajammal, the executive manager of the National Center of Assessment and Academic Accreditation. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker on behalf of His Excellency, the Vice Minister. We have Dr. Abdulrahman Al-Khrayef, the Deputy Minister of Education for Public Universities. He holds a PhD in Economics and Management and a master's degree in business administration, both from Leeds University. Dr. Al-Khrayef currently monitors both academic and administrative policies in 28 public universities. In the past, Dr. Al-Khrayef assumed a number of roles as part of his work experience. Most recently, he served as an advisor at the Royal Court. He also worked as an executive director of the Center for Labor Market Studies. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Abdulrahman to start his presentation. تفضل دكتور.
شكرا عليكم والشكر لله أولا وآخر على أن جمعنا في هذا المؤتمر المهم والحيوي بالذات في ظل هذه الجائحة اللي أسأل الله العظيم أن يرفعها.
I'd like to thank you very much, and I hope that this dilemma or crisis will be cleared soon, and we will go back to normal very soon. I'd like to express my thankfulness to His Majesty the King and the Crown Prince for their support for the system of education and training in Saudi Arabia. And I'd like to thank my colleagues in the field of ETEC for organizing this important conference in Saudi Arabia in this important time while we're waiting for the G20 summit in Saudi Arabia. My paper today is related to the initiatives that we are working on in the Ministry of Education for the improvement of the learning outcomes in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's higher education system. I will start by speaking about our vision, the vision of our leaders, the vision of His Royal Highness, and the different efforts that we work on in the ministry and in cooperation with the training and education agencies, in cooperation with ETEC and other agencies related to education and training in the kingdom. I will start speaking about the process of education and training. Is there a problem with the slides? I'd like to assure some points in the beginning that evaluation is one of the most important processes of developing any education system When we are able to measure the educational process and its outcomes, we'll be able to be informed with the current situation and compare it to our goals and our targets and our aspirations in order to develop our higher education system or the educational system in general. The Ministry of Education is committed to improving the outcomes of education programs because it is one of our most important uh, responsibilities to provide education for our young boys and girls, whether in public education or university education. Improving outcomes requires creating the foundation of and methodology of assessing, evaluating, and monitoring progress. This is important in order to speak about the initiatives that we're working on in the ministry in order to evaluate and assess the results and to increase the outcomes of education, whether in universities or in the public educational system. The ministries of education also launched several key initiatives, studied different international programs, and cooperated with the related parties in evaluation and measurement. These are some of the initiatives, starting with the, but I'm going to speak about the most recent ones that we worked on in cooperation with national and international related parties in the field of education. The first phase was in cooperation with the National Center for Measurement and Evaluation in some kinds of engineering programs to evaluate their results. After that, we studied 21 disciplines. Now we reached 37 disciplines. In the ministry, we work on a project. We are working on a project in cooperation with the universities to put a support for the uh, finality of the academic year. And these are some of the most important initiatives we work on in the ministry. Also, we have supportive initiatives to uplift the level of the outcomes of our learning educational system, like Muwa'amah or conformity initiative, according to the needs of the labor market in order to match the education outcomes to the labor market needs in terms of competencies, skills, and in order to know the knowledge and the skills and the competencies in order to build our programs in order to meet the needs of the labor market. Another initiative is related to uh, the field training, or if we can say the training that ends with the that uh, comes at the end of the academic study in order to transform the theoretical skills and knowledge that students had in universities to be practical in order to help them to help us increase the outcomes of the learning. Also, cooperative training, also the support of the institutional research through our support institutional and development research in order to provide and develop competencies, skills, and the awareness of researchers of our universities and to get them updated with the most recent arts and knowledge that they work on. The last and the most comprehensive one, which is related to the entrepreneurial university initiative that focuses on the strength points, the advantages of the university in its geographical area or the capabilities that the university have in terms of its disciplines. In the kingdom, we have a number of universities that identified their own research identities or scientific identities, like Imam Abdulrahman bin Faisal University, for example. They are interested in our medicine security in Saudi Arabia. King Faisal University is interested in our food security. Jeddah University is interested in supply chains and some other logistics. Al Qura University is interested in the field of crowd management, Hajj, and Umrah. And these are some of the advantages of each of our universities. I'm not going to speak on behalf of Princess Nourah University because Her Excellency is here and she is the president of the university. They are interested in qualifying our female colleagues and sisters, the ladies of our society, in terms of our developmental needs. The initiative that we are talking about in the evaluating the outcomes goes through some stages in order to measure the outcomes of our programs. We start by preparing reviews or the benchmarks that are of interest in any given field. After that, we set the standards to evaluate higher education outcomes and create an initial framework to evaluate learning outcomes, evaluation methods. After that, we prepare and draft questions, administer trial tests, then evaluation and follow-up. If we speak about the conformity in Mu'amah initiative, these are some details. We started by benchmarking in cooperation with the best international practices. We also provided some framework for this, studying supply and demand, identifying the disciplines and the skills required for any scientific program, and also building the ideal models that will be provided to universities in order to be guidelines for them. After that, providing the quantitative supply and demand analysis in order to provide the university specifications roadmap in order to achieve the vision of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Another initiative is related to cooperative training, which is called Mumakkina, in order for the ministry to work with universities so that all the programs include a part of our practical implementation system in order to uplift quality and to enlist it in the curricula of the universities, in order for the curricula not only to cover theoretical, but also to cover theoretical, practical, and everything as well. Also, partnership with the private or public sectors in order to through building a clear plan for the students and the participation of universities in the outcomes of the experience of the students. As for the institutional research support, it allows faculty members suitable opportunities to conduct in-depth research and helps them enrich study materials that are being presented to the students and helps them develop their teaching careers, which reflects positively on classrooms programs and links them to the national and international updates. Also, the entrepreneurial university, it encourages the university to focus on a particular sector or field, helps consolidate efforts, which contributes to the development of higher education and improving outcomes, and makes the university able to support and focus on the experts in the university, which contributes finally to developing curricula and improving the learning system. In conclusion, I'd like to mention again that it is very important that to evaluate and assess the effectiveness of our educational programs and gauging their compatibility with the labor market requirements, not only in order to know the skills that we need, but also to solve the challenges that we face in the kingdom and around the world. Also, also bringing the educational process full circle to leverage the results of programs. The role of ETEC in measuring the outcomes is important. Also, our partners from the specialized educational systems like health sectors and others, this will be reflected in our educational process. Also, the process of evaluation and development is a constant process linked to educational process itself. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Your Excellency, for allowing me to speak.
Abdulrahman, I'd like to remind the viewers to send their questions throughout the chat, and we will make sure that we address them all. Before I move on with the presentations, if you allow me, Dr. Al-Khrayef, you've produced a document showing the efforts, the lucrative efforts at the ministry, supporting the universities in the assessment of learning outcomes. What message do you have for the academics who are watching us today of how to utilize such data, such information? You've touched upon the exit point exams, you've touched upon the co-op training and how it relates to assessment. What would be your key message to university officials that are watching us today to utilize such data in their constant development of their academic activity?
يمكن الرسالة الرئيسية.
It is very important to us, and the main message that we want to share with our colleagues, the officials of the universities or the faculty members of universities and those interested in the educational process directly or indirectly, or the researchers in the universities. It's clear to tell them that the process of development and improving the learning outcomes is a complementary process. Our role in the university is to share the success stories and to provide regulations, but the role of universities is to share with us their learning outcomes. The outcomes that they get should be shared with us. Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dirk Van Damme. Dr. Dirk is a senior counselor in the Directorate for Education and Skills at the OECD in Paris, and he's also the acting head of the Center for Educational Research and Innovation. I asked Dr. Dirk, how would you like to be introduced? He said, I'd like to be seen as an academic that works for governments now. So I welcome you, Dr. Dirk. Before joining the OECD, Dr. Dirk was a professor of educational research at Ghent University and visiting professor at Seton Hall University in the US, and he was a counselor for several Flemish education ministers. Dr. Dirk Van Damme also published extensively on educational quality assurance and evaluation, and was a board member and expert to various quality assurance agencies and international organizations. Dr. Dirk today is going to speak to us about assessing higher education learning outcomes from the OECD experience. Particularly, he will discuss the Collegiate Learning Assessment, CLA, developed by the Council for Aid to Education. Thank you. Dr. Dirk, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this exciting panel and this very interesting conference. I also would like to thank the honorable first speaker for laying out so well the basic principles of evaluation and assessment in higher education. And I'm pleased to see how well the initiatives of the ministry in Saudi Arabia are advancing to meet that very important challenge. Indeed, I would like to speak to you very briefly about an initiative that we are now conducting over 5 years to implement an instrument for the assessment of generic academic skills. Maybe some of you in the audience will remember that the OECD has conducted the AHELO feasibility study between 2008 and 2013. AHELO stands for Assessing Higher Education Learning Outcomes. And it was an experiment to see whether it would be feasible to assess in a collaborative effort, but also cross-nationally, the outcomes, the learning outcomes of higher education. At the time, it was sometimes called the PISA for higher education, which was not entirely appropriate, but it indicated very well that we would like to move also the assessment of learning outcomes to higher education. Unfortunately, there was too much resistance way back in 2015, and member countries decided not to move forward with the main study, but we collaborated from 2016 onwards with the CAE in the United States because we thought that the instrument, the CLA Plus International, was a very interesting instrument for assessing generic skills. It focuses on critical thinking, problem solving, qualitative, quantitative reasoning, and written communication. And we thought it was one of the best instruments available around to focus over different subject fields on how to assess generic skills. I'm not going too much into detail on what the instrument actually is. And there is a lot of information on the website of CAE. It's basically a 90-minute assessment of generic skills on a performance task. And that's what makes it unique. It's really a task that students and graduates are asked to fulfill, which is linked to real-world challenges. And it's an open-ended question. So it's not a multiple choice test. It's an open-ended question, which allows the people who assess the response to have an indication of the critical thinking skills and the writing skills of the person. And also 25 selected response questions. So it's quite a heavy test, but it has proven over the years to have a very high predictive validity. People who score high on that test also have very much better learning, much better outcomes in the economic and the social domain, in the labor market outcomes, employability and earnings. So the predictive validity of this test is excellent. And it's also very much valued by employers as an assessment of the skills that they think are important for the 21st century economy and for the labor market. In the United States, this test is already implemented for many years. Here you see the distribution of the scores for the 2019 assessment, close to 7,000 people. And you see this quite normal distribution. So it indicates that the test really differentiates between certain levels of performance. There are people who are performing less well, and there are people who are performing very well. This chart is an interesting one because it gives you an idea of the performance of people who enter higher education institutions and people who leave higher education institutions after 3 or 4 years, the yellow bars. And you see that, as we can expect, that there is some progress in critical thinking skills when people move through higher education, but not as much as we would like to. So this is at the same time a quite worrisome graph, because we see that actually the amount that higher education institutions are contributing to the development of critical thinking skills is actually quite low. It's not as much as we would like to see it progressing. Still, and this may be a chart which is a little bit difficult to read. On the left, you have the students who are non-proficient, so who have low levels of critical thinking skills. On the right, you have students who have high levels of, who are proficient in critical thinking. And you have some differentiation according to the ethnicity of students, but also to the kind of institutions that they have been enrolled in. Competitive means the highly selective US universities. Non-competitive means the community colleges or universities who have no entry qualifications, actually. And you see that especially among Afro-Americans, you have students mostly enrolled in non-competitive institutions, but who are really proficient in critical thinking. So there is a kind of untapped talent pool among sections of the population in the United States, which are not well served by the competitive higher education system, which relies so much on branding. If you have a degree from Harvard or Yale or Stanford, you can be sure that you have a decent job and you have high earnings. That's not the case for non-competitive institutions. Still, there are many people, especially from marginalized ethnicity, who are critical thinkers and who are not having this benefit of a brand of a very competitive institution. So applying this test shows employers that there is actually a talent pool which is not yet tapped on and that they can benefit from in the future. So based on the experiences in the United States, we moved to experimental implementation of this test in many other countries. We have some small scale experiments done in Germany, in England. And the first national implementation is, and that's actually the work of one of the other speakers, Alberto, on this panel. He was very instrumental and helpful in getting this project forward at the time. But the TECO project was actually build around or on the basis of the CLA Plus instrument. We have had developments in Latin America. And a major breakthrough was last year when Finland decided to do a nationwide study. So implementing almost all higher education institutions. And that study is now close to be finalized. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the data, but I give you a few details later on. We are now moving forward, but of course we are a little bit handicapped because of the COVID-19 crisis, but we are discussing implementation in the Emirates, and we are all discussing future proposals for implementation in Hungary, Ukraine, and other countries. We have an annual meeting at the OECD every year where the participating and the interested countries join. And should Saudi Arabia be interested in this kind of initiative, of course, you are very welcome to join that meeting, even if you not have decided yet to participate in this international endeavor. There are many challenges around. I will not give you a very promising selling pitch because it's not an easy exercise. There are many objections and specifically from universities. It's maybe painful to say, but universities don't like to be assessed. And that's not unique to a certain country or a certain region in the world. I think it's quite universal. I personally have received many letters from university presidents saying we don't want to be assessed like you do at PISA, etc. So many objections coming from the academic community. Of course, the implementation also has its challenges. The student participation is voluntary. We try to incentivize, to motivate students through, for example, badges. In Finland, they have provided students who participated and who were successful in the test with a badge, which is recognized by employers. And that seems to have a very high impact on response rates. There are all kinds of methodological issues. Critical thinking assessment is not the easiest thing to do. It's much easier to just test literacy and numeracy as we do in PISA, but critical thinking is of course a much more complicated thing to test. We are now advancing very much on the coding of the open responses through artificial intelligence supporting automated coding systems. This is very much in its infancy, but it's very, very much promising. And we are also moving now to complete online testing. So there are many challenges, but all the challenges, yeah, we can overcome them. We are quite confident. Few words on the Finnish project. So 11 out of 14 universities and 7 out of 22 universities of applied sciences, which are the polytechnics sector, they have been participating, but they have participated on the condition that the government would not make any comparison between the institutions. And that's something which is perfectly understandable. The idea is not to have a ranking of institutions. The idea is for the OECD is not to have a ranking of countries like we do in that's not the purpose. It's just to give students the opportunity to show themselves the proficiency in critical thinking and for employers to have an idea of the level of proficiency in the graduate population. So the computer-based test was 2 hours, 15 minutes and was implemented for the first-year students and for the third-year students who would leave the undergraduate classes. Voluntary participation, so the participation rate is not extremely high. And of course, we have to look into all kinds of participation biases and selectivity in the response rate. But we have now data for close to 2,500 students, which is actually very, very meaningful. And those students who participated were very positive about the test and the results that they had. So each participating student has received their individual results. They have received a badge if they have been successful. The institutions themselves receive a confidential benchmarking report, comparing their own results with those of other institutions in Finland and a sample of comparable US and UK institutions. And now the team is busy drafting the national analytical report. And we have plans for a joint conference with our Finnish colleagues and friends early next year. So concluding, we think that this kind of exercise provides enormously interesting analytical opportunities. So we are now thinking of preparing a volume where we bring together the different national data sets and see how we can make sense out of all these data. The response rates are still on the low side, but we have enough background variables to correct them. We think that there is a lot of very interesting analysis to be done on the impact of background, family background, of course, the secondary education that has been followed, some effects of field of study, institutions, etc., etc. What next? So we have new projects coming up in Latin America and in the Emirates, as I mentioned. There is also interest in some Asian countries that we have to explore. As I mentioned, we are preparing a report to be published next year on the first 5 years, and based on all the data that we have. And we hope to maybe in the future to have the backing of OECD member countries on a proposal to expand and further develop this work in the future. I will stop here. I hope I've given you some appetite in this initiative. If you are interested, don't hesitate to contact myself or the colleagues at the OECD. And I'm very grateful for your attention. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dirk. I think you've raised some very interesting points. I'd like to remind the viewers again to send their questions over the chat, but Dr. Dirk, I can't move on with the presentations before I ask you a question. You've mentioned the challenges that you're facing now and the resistance that you get from academics that this tool is not used to rank universities or to be used to compare and contrast. Does that mean the interpretation of the results and the validity of the results is still not well established? Because we should be using this exercise to drive change in universities. So in your experience, the tool exists, the exercise has been practiced in different countries. I think there's enough strength and knowledge, expertise in the area to interpret these results. And I think the graph that you put forward, where the reputation of the university does not really correlate with the outcomes of this assessment tool. So if you can just comment on this academic resistance and the interpretation of the results. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I could fill another hour in answering that question. From a purely technical point of view, I think the validity and the reliability of the instrument is great, given the fact that critical thinking is a rather complicated construct. Much more complicated than just testing literacy and numeracy. So critical thinking is a complicated concept, but I think the CLA Plus instrument, more so than competitors in this field, and there are some other very interesting experiments. I don't think anyone should have the monopoly on whatever instrument. So there is some competition between instruments, and that's good. But I think the technical qualities of the CLA Plus International, the latest version, because there has been a lot of improvement over the years, is good, close to excellent. I think the resistance of academics, and I'm an academic myself, and I very much understand some of the arguments that are used. I think some of the other arguments are less appropriate. I think they mainly fear to be ranked. because there are so many experiences with the international rankings that we see. I think we have to understand and recognize and value that criticism. And we have always said from the early beginning, the analogy with something like PISA for higher education is not adequate because we don't want to rank countries or institutions. At the same time, the results of the CLA Plus experiments indicate a very, very important general problem. The assessment by universities, which is mainly based on field of study assessments, so subject matter assessments, does not provide an excellent picture on how well students are doing on the skills that employers value so much. So the discussion between employers and universities is on the international level is becoming sharper. And some employers say, well, we don't trust the assessments by universities anymore. There are many big companies, and there is a website actually which is listing the companies, the international companies who don't use degrees anymore to differentiate between applicants for a job. Arthur Andersen, Ernst & Young, some Googles and Facebooks, etc. They are all listed on that website, and they have publicly said, look, for us, university degrees are no longer an interesting measure to decide whether an applicant is fit for this or that job, even a highly qualified job. And they are now moving to assessing candidates themselves. I think this is raising a couple of very interesting questions for universities. There is a real problem of trust in university assessments. And we think that something which is very close to academic assessment, like the CLA Plus International, it's not a commercial company. It's not someone. It's a little bit in between academia and the, let's say, the employer's world. I think this kind of assessment could easily bridge the gap that is now emerging between universities and employers. And it is focusing on one of the critically important skills that employers are identifying, which is critical thinking. And every university will say, we try to promote critical thinking, but they don't know whether they are successful in that. They don't have instruments. When I was an academic, I was not testing students or graduates for their academic critical thinking. I was assessing paperwork. Maybe there was an element of critical thinking that I implemented in my own assessment practice, but this is completely unreliable. It's not in that way that universities will convince the outside world that they actually are promoting critical thinking. So that's why I have such a strong belief in that kind of assessment. I personally would not like to see the whole area of assessment moving to the employer side. I think that would be really an essential problem for universities if they lose the assessment. And that's going on now. I think that's going on in the United States. It's going on in Europe. And there are many associated developments like micro-credentials and all kinds of other new developments in the area of assessment. You see that universities are losing the struggle to have assessment within their own boundaries. And I think that's really a very important development, and they should be much more concerned instead of just opposing any initiative, because they are not just opposing CLA Plus, they are also opposing many other developments in the assessment fields, which is not perceived to be out of academia. Absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm speaking too long, but this is a topic which is going very much to my heart, and that's why
I assure you, you've presented the CLA Plus to be the new disruption in the assessment. And as a university president, I have the appetite now to actually try the tool myself in my university. So thank you very much, Dr. Van Damme. It is also my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Alberto Ciafelli. Dr. Alberto is the head of self-assessment, periodic evaluation, and accreditation at the Italian National Agency for the Evaluation of Universities and Research Institutes in Italy. He graduated in biology and has a PhD in morphogenetic science and cell biology. In the Italian QA agency, he worked on the first research quality assessment exercise, then as an evaluation expert for higher education institutions. Dr. Ciafelli has direct experience in the development of public policies in the field of higher education and an in-depth knowledge of quality assurance system. Today, he's speaking to us about the higher education assessment in Italy. Welcome, Dr. Ciafelli. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good afternoon, everybody. I really thank the organizers for inviting me, and I hope I could contribute to the discussion, giving you a picture of what the higher education external assessment system works in Italy from the point of view of the Italian National Evaluation Agency. So I'm sharing my presentation now. I hope you can see it clearly.
Clear.
I have sent a presentation, a bit longer presentation, because it was important for me to give the whole picture of what is the agency doing in Italy. And in particular, I have to say that the National Agency for the Evaluation of University and Research Institutes, that I will call ANVUR for being to be brief, it's an independent public body. So we have the task to oversee the national higher education system, and we have the primary objective to enhance its overall quality. So it is about assessing for the enhancement of the overall quality of our national higher education system. And we are doing a lot of different evaluations and assessment procedures that span the full range of activities of the universities. So I'm talking about teaching and learning, the research, third mission, or so-called the social dimension related activities, and administrative performance also. And we are using for this assessment both output and process evaluation methodologies. So we are trying to integrate these different methodologies and different aspects that can give the complete view of the activities that are carried out by universities. Here I show you some examples. As you can see, we have different logos for different evaluation and assessment activities we are carrying as an agency. There is also the TECO test that Dirk was saying before. So we have an output evaluation for research products, for example, and this is integrated with the third mission assessment procedures. We have the more, let's say, quality assurance related activities. These are results guided process evaluations. And also we have the learning outcome measurements. I have to say it is more a measure than a complete assessment, and then we can discuss further in the next slides. For the teaching and learning outputs, we also do a process evaluation related to administrative performance that for each public university. And this is really helping the universities to improve themselves and improve their internal systems. So To make it short, I will, due to the timing for the presentation, I would focus on the aspects that are more, let's say, experimental, or that in a way could be more innovative, related to the activities that other agencies around Europe are carrying out as a quality assurance agency, for example. So I would like to say two things about the social dimension. This is a really important aspect, and it's really a challenge for our activities as an agency, just because, starting from the fact that this is a concept that it's still very open, it's hard to identify, and thus it's hard to find a way to understand it and then assessing it. Here you can find in this slide some examples of what we could see as a third mission related activities from carried out by a university. It's about research, but it's also about production of public goods. And in Italy, we started to work on that by integrating some of these aspects in the national external QA system. So we identified some requisites and indicators then that are then integrated in the system that we use for the accreditation of higher education institution and study programs. This is something that is really interesting also from the side of universities, because it allows them to really present nationally what they are doing, what is their idea of third mission, and what they are really investing on in order to have a stronger impact on their environment and at the national and international level. At the same time, this is an aspect that is still considered third compared to the other dimensions, so it does not receive the equal attention in terms of monitoring and the improvement of quality assurance system. So it's still something that it's growing, but at the same time, it does not have the adequate space yet. Of course, this is also due to the fact that there is a lack of proper incentive structures at the institutional, national, and also European level. And there's also the, let's say, academic resistance that is always something to take care of in each assessment procedure. From our point of view, the critical points are, of course, to find a shared definition between all the institutions of these social dimension activities, to then identify which could be the sources, the documental sources, and the data we as an agency could use for the assessment of these activities. We have to take into account that we are assessing universities that are in very different regions in the country, and so we are facing different contexts. And last but not least, there's really a need of expertise to assess these kind of activities. And it's not so simple to find experts to be used for the peer review these activities. I will then go to the principal theme of this session. So what about the assessment of learning outcomes in higher education? Here I've taken a slide from the OECD 2017. For what I heard in the beginning of this conference, I understand that everyone agree about the importance and the relevance of knowing and assessing the outcomes of higher education graduates, also for the labor market. So I will just go straight and talk about what is our agency doing in these experimental building of a tool that could be used to measure the learning outcomes of university students. It's called the TECO. It's a test that is used to measure generic skills. So it's called TECO-T. And these skills are those developed during the university career, regardless of their specific studies. So can be compared between different programs. And also the disciplinary skills that are strictly linked to the specific contents of the programs, and then can therefore be compared only with programs with similar core contents. And we are measuring these learning outcomes at the end of the bachelor's programs as of now. So students that are concluding their bachelor programs. In the last years, we started to measure the learning outcomes also of students that are enrolled in the first and in the second year, to identify and to find out if really there's an added value of attempting a university program for the development of generic skills. And also we are, of course, expecting a strong development of disciplinary skills. We are using to build up this test a different approach, top-down approach for the generic skills test. So it's the agency with the help of a working group that is made of professors from all around universities all around the country to identify and build up the test. While for the different disciplinary tests, we are using a bottom-up approach. So it's the academia that is organizing with the support of the agency, of course, to build working groups and create the TECO-D for different disciplines. This is the list of some of the features of these tests we are delivering in Italy. The participation is voluntary for universities, for study programs within participating universities, and for students. So it's still experimental, we can say. This is delivered online in a controlled environment, and is made up only of selected response questions. This is important for us because we need to make an automated scoring in order to have and give a very quick feedback to universities and to students. So we had to take off the written part that Dirk was talking about when talking about the CLA Plus. We are then, as an agency, calculating the results with the ERT model. It's a statistical model for each part of the test. And most importantly, we are not using the result to make rankings or to affect the student's career. So I wrote, results do not affect neither student's career nor teachers, because I have to confirm it is important to clarify that these results are not used to make rankings or to judge the work of professors. I construct this table while Dirk was talking very rapidly to show how in the different years we are increasing the participation of universities and students in Italy to the TECO test, and also how we are developing the different generic skills. So as you can see, in the first year, we delivered the literacy and numeracy part of the test. And we started this year with the problem solving and also civics that could also be seen as citizenship skills in the generic skill test. While for the different disciplinary tests, those are increasing in numbers. So we are more and more working groups from the academia that are constructing and validating the disciplinary test.
Dr. Ciolfi, just a reminder of the time, please.
Yeah, thank you.
3 minutes, please.
Yeah. The TECO results are made available to all attending students and also to all the study programs coordinators. So it is important to understand that the reason why we are doing this test is first of all to give the study program coordinators the possibility to understand if there is something that is going well or if there are some problems, and so rethink and reorganize programs, study programs accordingly. And this is also contribute to the analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of this disciplinary training. So we are encouraging the use of evidence-based strategies for higher education improvement with the use of this tool. My conclusion, I'm not giving answer, but instead I'm raising questions for the discussion to be. Here I put some of the threats that we are aware of for all the assessment activities we are carrying on in Italy. Bureaucratization, it's a common element, and also an important thing to underline is the inconsistency between outcomes indicator and process-based evaluation. And this is due to the fact that we are using different approaches, and sometimes the same university performs well from a side and not from the other. And this is not so simple to explain. Outputs and outcomes depends on multiple inputs. And so this could be detectable and also described at various levels. The comparison of programs, departments, institutions, so the possible comparison of result, it's not always possible, and in most of the cases it's not always useful, and also the fact that quality is expensive. So we are carrying out a lot of activities, and we and also the higher education system in Italy, it's not so well fulfilled, let's say, with public resources. I will conclude with an international perspective. It is important from the agency point of view to participate to a lot of activities internationally, because this is giving us the opportunity to develop and share the framework of our activity, of our assessment activities, to continuously improve ourselves and continuously improve what is the higher education area that is developing very fast in Europe. There are other important issues to be addressed that we already know, but we still don't know how to address correctly and effectively the assessment. And this is about the international joint degrees, European universities that are more or less university alliances around Europe. What about micro-credential, online education? So this is really a challenge for our activities as an agency. And also the COVID-19 disease gives us other opportunities, because this was something that was able to show at the country level some weaknesses, but also open to many innovation opportunities. And so we as an agency can play an important role in offering guidelines to the higher education institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Alberto Ciolfi, for a very informative session. Thank you for sharing the experience from Italy. I've received a number of questions on the chat, so I'll save the discussion till the end of our presentations. It is my pleasure now to introduce my colleague, Dr. Sohail Bajammal. He's the Executive Manager and at the National Center of Assessment and Academic Accreditation. Dr. Sohail is an academic and orthopedic spine surgeon. He completed his orthopedic training at McMaster University. He also obtained a master's degree in health research methodology and his fellowship training from the University of Calgary. Besides his clinical career, Dr. Sohail has held multiple leadership positions in academia, such as the Vice Dean for Academic Development, the Vice Dean for Research, the Director of the Medical Research Center, and he also launched many initiatives for patient safety, patient experience, such as establishing the Saudi Spine Society in 2014. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sohail to present the transformation of academic accreditation in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise due to Allah, peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad, his family and companions. Your Excellencies, thank you for inviting me to participate in this conference. I ask for your permission to speak in English, as I was told that 60% are international guests. Thank you very much.
This journey, I would say, on academic accreditation transformation in Saudi Arabia. The National Center for Academic Accreditation and Evaluation, we are the only entity in Saudi Arabia who is responsible for accrediting all higher education institutions. We are part of the Education and Training Evaluation Commission, the great institution that consists of more than 4 other centers responsible for the whole K-12 as well as vocational training. So with this background, I would like to briefly go over our journey and transformation that started early this year with the exceptional situation with the COVID-19 and all the challenges. We are truly honored to have the ETEC, the Education, Training, Evaluation Commission, as an independent entity reporting directly to the Prime Minister. That gives the ETEC the independency in evaluation and assessment. So we'll start with the presentation. الزملاء الحاضرين باللغة العربية بإمكانهم تنزيل البرنامج العرض باللغة العربية وكذلك السماع للغة العربية في قناة الموقع. سنتحدث we'll talk briefly on the global higher education challenges. What are the challenges that shared by many countries, including Saudi Arabia? We'll go over the journey briefly of the academic accreditation transformation. I will focus specifically on certain transformation projects related to learning outcomes, as it is the topic of this theme. These are some of the challenges that, interestingly, I've heard being repeated this morning as well as yesterday. I think it's a challenge that all countries at different levels are facing. There are the academic mobility concern, the cross-border education concern, the whole teaching and learning philosophy and strategies are evolving, and we really need to keep up with whether as a quality assurance agency or as institutions providing these services. Industry 4.0 is another challenge that we, as higher education institutions and quality assurance, we need to be preparing our graduates for, as well as we as institutions need to be aligned with these Industry 4.0 concepts. Even quality is changing. We're calling it the Quality 4.0. People immediately think it's data, and it is truly data, but the concept of connected leadership, the competency, collaboration, all of these, the processes, the big data analytics, all of these are actually implemented in the new organizational structure of the Education and Training Evaluation Commission. It's basically a reflection of the Quality 4.0. Many of the big data and the connectivity and the scalability, these are some of the projects that we started doing with the help of the Digital Transformation Department in the institution. There is always balance, that it's a fine balance between having to provide increased access to students and increased demands, and ensuring that the quality of graduates are of top quality. The balance between issues with financial concerns and maintaining and improving the quality of teaching and learning. We always have that debate between academia and industry, the debate between academic and applied research, the efficiency and effectiveness and its implication on the financial aspects and the quality aspects of higher education processes. There is always that balance between local needs, local demands, and international profile and international needs and demands. So it is a tough job for healthcare institutions. It is as well a tough job for us to enable the higher education institutions to succeed. This is in a very brief the story of the National Academic Accreditation in Saudi Arabia. It started in 2004. It went through different phases, I would say, of maturity. In the second phase, supporting institution, there was more of capacity building across different institutions in the country. And then the real accreditation visit started in 2010. There were a round of improvement of the processes, the standards, the many aspects of improvement done. But what we are doing this year is actually lots of transformative actions and transformative move to change the academic accreditation, as I will briefly discuss in a minute. These are, I would say, only the strategic direction for transformation as they relate to learning outcomes. 2020 is different from 2004. We have 16 years. The maturity of the quality assurance in Saudi Arabia has changed. So we really need to think differently, to move differently. We move towards supporting excellence and continuous improvement, moving from process-based to outcome-based accreditation. And you will see that in our projects as it will be evidence how we are moving from process to outcome-based. We are focusing a lot on spreading and promoting culture at the national ecosystem. And when I say the ecosystem, it's not only the higher education institutions, it's the professional societies, the professional associations. They are all part of the industry, the labor market. They're all part of the national ecosystem, and as well as aligning with international trends. This slide basically summarizes the perspective or the philosophy, how we're moving from a very generic programmatic accreditation to an integrated discipline-specific accreditation with the discipline-specific learning outcomes. We're moving from a one-size-fits-all. It's always people saying, what are the forms that we are using to apply for quality assurance? Quality is not about forms. Quality is about really we as a quality assurance need to be flexible and adaptive according to the maturity and the institution type and the mission of that institution. We're moving from a traditional accreditation to a smart, digital, risk-based, predictive. So we are basically data-driven academic accreditation, focusing on input. We're moving into outcome focus. We are again focusing on the culture a lot, and most of our standards, most of our activities are focusing on these areas. We don't believe in centralized decision and management. We believe in partnership. Most of our efforts, most of these projects that you'll be hearing have been discussed, have been exchanged with our colleagues in the universities, and even our governance, even our model of taking decision in academic accreditation, it's done through a very innovative accreditation model that I will show you in a second. It's never a single model fits all. It really needs to be an ecosystem focused with a balance between academia and professional societies and the market. This is a brief outlook. I'm aware of the time. We have a background of the continuous evaluation as the background of all what we are doing. This is we're keeping it as the back end of all of our processes. And then we have at the bottom of this ecosystem, we have the institution accreditation and universities, and we are introducing a new component of building block, which is the cross-border accreditation. We are adding a new process, which is the provisional accreditation, and soon, in a couple of months, inshallah, the risk-based accreditation. We are adding, contemplating with the board of directors of ETEC to add a new building block, which is the institution accreditation for colleges. This has been approved by the board of the director that we will be licensing international entities, international accreditation agencies. And the reason for that is we really want, whether the national entities or the international entities, we really want them to be emphasizing on learning outcomes. We want them to be market sensitive, to the local market is sensitive. It's not just about having a certificate from any international entities. And that's why we have lots of support from leading international agencies, because this is in alignment of what they're doing of their core business. These are, currently we have the undergraduate, the postgraduate, as well as the e-learning accreditation standards. But this is eventually, we are in the process of delegating or licensing these entities to professional bodies like the Saudi Commission for Health Specialties, the Saudi Council of Engineers, the Saudi Council of Accountants, and and the rest of the professional engineers. Now, if you look at this, these are all vertically oriented. So it goes into a program, or it goes into an institution. It goes really into the depth detail of the institutions. So what we have recognized that we really need to integrate all of these data through the ranking system. So we, inshallah, in a couple of months, inshallah, we will be announcing the Saudi universities ranking. We started collecting the data. Initially, it will be ranking for universities, and it will be basically, I will go through that in a slide. It will address, and it will be focused on learning outcomes to a high degree. And this will this basically will complement the vertically oriented accreditation with the horizontally oriented ranking as well as evaluation systems. These are some of the dimensions. I'm not going to go through them, but basically it's very detailed plan on, we are adding new types of accreditation types. We have improved our processes quite a lot to make them really efficient. We did lots of process re-engineering. We're working with our colleague in the digital transformation to help us really go digital with the data warehouses. We're working on our standards according to international best practices. Our reviewers, we did the administration of training did a great job in doing lots of online and e-learning for our reviewers, and even they're going through the licensing. We're moving towards discipline-specific reviewing development. The governance, I will talk to that in a slide in a minute. We are investing a lot in communicating and improving our network with universities and colleges, and building really a customer relationship management, having a direct communication with the faculty and students and the community. These are brief examples. In each one of them, very briefly, in one slide, I will talk about what have we done for the accreditation standards. In 2004 to 2018, it was identical. The institutional and programmatic accreditation were identical, but in 2018 they were more specific for the programs accreditation. There were lots of process re-engineering done. There were new substandard on teaching and learning. Now in 2020, we are doing a transformation. We kicked off a transformation. We introduced the concept of provisional accreditation. We released and announced the e-learning and distance education standards. We kicked off a couple of weeks ago the key learning outcomes project. And as I mentioned, we are planning the risk-based accreditation. For the e-learning, we are working in harmony with the national e-learning system. They are doing the licensing aspect of the e-learning and distance education. And we are, as the National Center for Academic Accreditation, we will be doing the provisional accreditation and later on the programmatic accreditation. As far as it goes in the governance, on the left hand of the screen, you see the normal processes that we had till a couple of weeks ago, where in our visits, you will have an external review done by an independent team, a review panel who are really trained, and they are independent from the NCAA. And then these reports are reviewed by an independent accreditation advisory committee, and then it comes to the executive director to sign these reports. But even with this model, we felt that in order to make it really more learning outcomes oriented, in order to engage the professional societies, in order to engage the market more, we have moved and we have changed, and we have established discipline-specific accreditation council, where these councils, we have 5 of them initially: the health sciences, engineering, Arabic and Islamic, and humanities. And these councils basically will take the responsibility gradually into really taking over the responsibility in this discipline under the regulatory function of the NCAA and ETEC. The fourth point that we are really proud of launching with the help of the administration of standards. We have an independent administration here under ETEC, and the whole goal of this key learning outcomes project is really to make discipline-specific accreditation visits, whether it's engineering, health sciences. It will help in selecting appropriate teaching models in the future. It will help in crossing that gap between academia and the labor market. It will help as a reference, as a national reference for exit exams and professional exams. So it will be an important cornerstone in future development for learning outcomes. The fifth point that we are really proud of is the Saudi universities ranking. As you can see here, a large percentage of these metrics or indices are based on objective learning outcomes oriented, whether it's the educational outcomes, the independent standardized exams, which, as I mentioned in my introduction, independent standardized exams need to be done by independent entities rather than by the universities themselves. We have, the employability. We are taking that into consideration, and I'd really like to thank all the national government entities who really helped us and collaborated with us in providing these data. Almost everyone we knocked their doors, they were very supportive in helping in this very ambitious national program. This is the last slide. In addition to what I have mentioned of the academic accreditation, which is vertically, and the ranking, which is horizontally, cross-sectionally across the whole country, these evaluation studies are usually assigned to ETEC or to the NCAA by the Royal Court. These are some examples: evaluation of the preparatory year, evaluation of the learning quality in private institutes. We have completed these and submitted the reports to the Royal Court. And we have ongoing studies that we just started, like the quality of engineering education. It's a very high-level cross-sectional study. We will start soon on the quality of learning outcomes in private health sciences colleges. So I hope that I've covered these topics in 15 minutes and 45 seconds. We have talked about the higher education challenges and trends, overview of the transformation. And I would truly say, this is my last slide, definitely. This is my thank you slide. It's thank you for the 68 institutions who has always, they have been always very supportive of all of our challenges, all of our new initiatives. They will give us very neutral suggestions of improvement, and they will be very welcoming in accepting these new ideas. So a big thank you to all the 68 higher education institutions, and thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Dr. Sohail. I think you've raised two very important points for discussion. You've given an excellent overview of the transformation that's taking place in Saudi Arabia, but you've raised two very controversial key points that we will discuss later. One is this balance between job market and employability-driven accreditation versus the academic assessment. And I think our previous speakers have also alluded to that, and the accreditation and ranking. So we'll come back to this. All 68 institutions will have very strong point of views about these two points. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pedro Teixeira. Dr. Pedro is the director of the Center for Research in Higher Education Policies and professor at the Faculty of Economics at the University of Porto. Dr. Pedro has served as an advisor on higher education and science to the President of Portugal, and he was the Vice Rector for Academic Affairs at the University of Porto and was also a member of Portugal's National Council of Education. Dr. Pedro served on the evaluation panels for the European University Association, the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education. He's also a member at the Consortium of Higher Education Researchers and a research fellow at the Institute for the Study of Labor. Today, Dr. Pedro is talking about diversity and differentiation in higher education. Welcome, Dr. Pedro. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it is really a pleasure for me to participate. I'm very grateful for the invitation and for the opportunity to share with you some of the work. I hope that you're listening me. The listening is okay.
It's clear. Very
okay,
clear.
Thank you very much. And I will now the presentation. So what I'm trying to do, I probably will not go into detail in some of the slides, but I will share them with you. So and you'll have my contact at the end. So in case you are interested in some of the aspects or you want to discuss further, if we don't have time and then in the session, then I'll be happy to be contacted. But what I'll try to share with you in the few minutes that I have, is the result of a joint experience that I find that is very useful and very interesting, which is, on the one hand, I've been interested for many years in the changes in the landscape in higher education, and with the emergence of private providers and the multiple combinations of public and private providers in higher education. And at the same time, I've been involved, as you've mentioned, for many years in the review and evaluation of universities and quite a few of private universities, and also the review of systems of quality assurance that have to deal both with public and private providers. And I think for me, one of the aspects that has been very interesting in bringing together these two experiences is how to address the issue of diversity in higher education. So for a long time, have been discussing in higher education the importance of having a more diverse supply. One of the things that I think, one of the rationales that is, I think, very central to the discussion that we're having today, and that is related to some of the things that my colleagues in the panel have already presented, is that you want to encourage the articulation between higher education and society, higher education and the labor market. You want institutions to be responsive to the needs of society in many different ways. So you want to encourage institutions to find different paths, different ways, different approaches to fulfill and satisfy those needs. And there is a long-standing debate in higher education about how to encourage how to encourage greater diversity in higher education, and the expectation also that by the emergence of private higher education, that this would contribute to a wider choice among students and also among employers regarding the profiles of graduates. One of the things that I've also found interesting is that in a lot of the literature that we have, more academic literature in diversity in higher education, quite often diversity is seen as a tool in itself, as an end in itself, and not so much as an instrument. And in previous work, I was interested in trying to assess not only diversity for its own sake, but also the impact of this diversity through several ways. So not only in terms of program diversity, which is probably the central aspect of the discussion today, but also in even the impact in terms of the learning outcomes can be operated not only in terms of the profile of the program, but in different ways. In the profile, for instance, of the academic staff, that can have an impact in terms of the learning outcomes, in the delivery process. And of course, one of the things that has become more crucial in recent months is distance learning, but this has been around for many years. So there are many ways through which higher education institutions can promote this diversity. And as I mentioned, there was this expectation that private providers would bring greater diversity to the system. And in initial research that I've done with colleagues some years ago, we start finding that actually the results were a bit contradictory to these expectations. So we found that quite often in many countries, private education behaved in a way that was trying to emulate what was the behavior of public institutions that were more longly established, and that therefore, in a way to build a reputation, they would tend to emulate providers that already exist in the system. Also, because of competition, they tended to imitate and to produce programs that were successful. So we found less diversity than expected, and that public and private systems, instead of being complementary to each other, they ended quite often to overlap, quite often in terms of regions, in terms of types of programs. And so for us, it has been interesting, and we've been trying to explore how different and how similar are public and private systems, how much do they contribute to this diversity and to a diverse system of higher education. So what I will present just briefly is an overview of patterns that we found in higher education. In many ways, the patterns that I will identify here can be found in other regions, but I will just highlight results from European higher education because the ones that I know better in terms of the empirical data, and because I've participated also in several comparative projects that looked at that try to build a database of European higher education institutions. So the questions that I was interested when I explored this data was, really how different are public and private institutions? How much are they specialized or comprehensive? In which areas do they tend to specialize, if they specialize? How is the balance between different missions, namely between education, teaching, and research? And what about the geographical coverage of both public and private higher education? And one of the things that we find when we look at these two sectors in many systems is that normally public institutions tend to be larger than, on average, than private institutions. And that has quite a logical implication in terms of the profile. So public institutions tend to be more comprehensive. They tend to focus on different levels of education, different levels of higher education, meaning bachelor, master, and PhD. So they tend to cover the full range of programs. They also tend to cover more disciplines. And whereas private institutions tend to be smaller on average, they tend to be more specialized. And they also quite often tend to focus on the first level, the first cycle, let's say the bachelor degree, sometimes master level, but much less in terms of the doctoral level. And when we look in terms of the regional, the geographical coverage of the regional diversification, you see on your left-hand side the coverage in terms of public institutions across Europe, and then on your right-hand side the coverage in terms of private institutions. And I think, visually, immediately you see that whereas in the public sector tends to cover almost all regions. So in all regions you will find public supply of higher education. In many countries we see that the private sector has a much more concentrated pattern in terms of its geographical coverage. And this pattern of concentration is also when we look in terms of the number of educational fields, and using the traditional distribution by educational fields, we see that on average, public institutions in Europe tend to cover, if not all the areas, most of the areas. So in many systems, on average, public institutions cover 7 out of 8 or 6 out of 8 education fields. So they tend to be more generalist institutions, whereas the private institutions tend to be much more specialized. On average, quite often they cover only 1 or 2 of these large educational fields that we normally use in international comparisons. And when we try to systematize this, and especially when we try to capture this degree of specialization by the size of the institutions, by their enrollments, we see that for systems that have sizable public and private higher education sector in their system, we see that the private sector is really much more concentrated, much more specialized, much less diverse than the public sector, and that means that we're talking about 2 sectors that have different profiles and different challenges. So I will not highlight more than what I've just said. One of the things that is also very important is that the profile in terms of areas of specialization is also very specific in the private sector. The private sector tends to be much more focused on social science, business, law, and much less in terms of science, engineering, and humanities. So the private sector is much more specialized in areas that have strong demand, strong student demand, and strong labor market demand, and tends to avoid those educational sectors or those educational fields that are more expensive, that are more risky, and where the demand is also smaller. And the other thing that I think is also important when we discuss about accreditation quality assurance in this combined public-private systems is that the profile is also different. As I said, the emphasis in terms of the private sector is much more in terms of teaching and education and much less in terms of research. This also is related to the disciplinary profile. So quite often the emphasis in law, business, economics, management, social science, where the research intensity, where the resources allocated to research, the visibility of research, it's much smaller than if we go to hard sciences, to technological areas, or to the health sciences. But also has to do with the profile of their staff. So quite often in private institutions, we find a much stronger presence of part-time staff, either because they share their time between public and private institutions, but also they share their time between their contribution to universities and their professional activities. Quite often this is explicitly intended by private institutions because they want to strengthen the link with professional activity, with practice, with the labor market. But this also means that this quite often is a professional, is an academic staff that is less qualified in terms of academic degrees, so a lower share of academic staff with a PhD, and also that their engagement with institutions, especially with research activities, is also much smaller. So we have a profile of institutions that is clearly different between the public and private sector. Of course, some of these has to do with the average size of the institutions in the public and the private sector. Some of these has to do with the level of maturity of the private sector, that it is much smaller. So one could say that, well, once the private sector becomes more consolidated, will also build a more significant presence in terms of research. But what we have seen a system sector is that still there is a different profile that persists. So in the time that I have left, and I think I only have a few minutes left, I would like really to draw the implications of these in terms of quality assurance. I really don't want to provide answers. I'm much more concerned in terms of raising issues based on the experience that I've had in discussing this with universities, discussing with this with agencies dealing with this, and especially the big challenge is, on the one hand, if you look at the declarations of policymakers, of leaders of institutions, leaders of agencies, quite often they emphasize the importance of diversity in higher education. But the problem is how to draw the implications of this and how to be consequential with this when you look at the way quality assurance and accreditation is implemented. And one of the things that I think it's important to discuss is what types of diversity do you want to encourage? What types of diversity do you think there is important to exist in higher education? How much do you want to encourage program diversity? How much do you encourage diversity in terms of curriculum? How much do you want to encourage diversity in terms of the professional versus more academic emphasis, even in the same discipline? So the question of, it's not so much the differences between disciplines, but also even in each discipline, let's say in engineering, in economics, in health, in law, you may have programs, you may have a coexistence of programs that have more, they're more academically oriented and programs that are more professional oriented. This may result, because the profile of the program, the profile of the academic staff teaching the program is different. How much freedom do you want to allow the institutions to do this? How much do you want to allow programs to exist in institutions that have a very limited engagement in terms of research? What are the risks of allowing this? But at the same time, or looking on the other side, how much can you impose an emphasis on research, especially in fundamental research, in institutions that are very much dependent on the tuition fees paid by the students? How much, in many ways, in many cases, those private institutions are not entitled or are not competitive to access research funding. So it will be very difficult for them to have a strong presence and a strong commitment to research. The financial viability of having a permanent staff will be questionable in many of these cases because of the size of the institution. It won't be viable. So where do you want to draw the line between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of research? And how much do you want to emphasize a balance between fundamental research and applied research, both in public and in private institutions? So the question that I'm raising, that I think is a big challenge for many program evaluation, for many accreditation systems, is how do you combine the diversity that you want to encourage with the consistency? Because at the same time, the other argument will be, well, you want families and students and employers to trust the system. And the way private sector has developed in many systems has not been particularly favorable to consolidate that trust. Though there is a perception in many systems that the expansion of the private sector was very much focused in absorbing demand, in expanding very rapidly, without significant concerns with quality. So how do you want to use accreditation quality assurance to ensure that everyone fulfills a minimum standard, everyone attains a level of consistency and credibility from academic and educational point of view, and satisfy minimum criteria, but at the same time, in a way that does not constrain the diversity of the system and does not lead to a degree of homogenization in the system that prevents the diversity that you want to encourage. And this means that we need to move from sort of generic statements about diversity in the system and to infuse the process of accreditation in terms of what you ask institutions to fulfill in terms of the forms. What are your concerns when you review programs and when you review institutions? How do you compose the panels? For instance, by including professionals or people with professional expertise that can value and then can assess adequately the contribution of institutions that have a stronger professional accreditation, professional orientation. How much do you accommodate in terms of criteria, these different profiles of institutions, these different missions, these different emphases or balances between education and research? And how much do you accommodate this in terms of assessment? Because, well, institutions necessarily will expect their programs to be fairly assessed, to be accredited, otherwise they cannot be sustainable. And they will necessarily adjust to what is expected. So if you are not consistent between what you say in terms of diversity, but then what you do in terms of accreditation and quality assurance, then institutions will look at what you say and what you do. So what my experience is that this is much more difficult to implement because quite often of the lack of trust and lack of legitimacy that private education institutions face. But that if you really want to encourage diversity in the system and diversity that is accepted and trusted by the system, by families, by employers, by society at large, then you need to really connect what you do in terms of diversity with what you do in terms of quality assurance. I think I've covered most of the material, especially I think I've exhausted the time that I allocated. I've just listed some of the main work that works at the background for the results that I presented. I'm very grateful for the time and for your patience, and I'll be happy to participate in discussion if we still have time for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pedro. Yes, we went over time, but given the importance of what you were presenting and the relevance of the information to everyone here, it is debatable how much differentiation can we allow in a very heavily regulated, structured accreditation process in the private sector. Now, I thank all our esteemed speakers for the very informative information that we've received today, and I also thank the viewers for their valuable input and their stimulating questions. I wouldn't say provocative, but in some instances where we talk about the role of institutions versus the accreditation and the audit, I will try to focus on areas of relevance and things that have emerged more frequently in the questions of the audience. I will throw 3 main points, and then I'll ask every speaker to comment for a minute to a minute and a half. A common theme in the questions is how do we find the balance between education and the job market? What are the expectations? And one of the viewers asked, are we shifting to an era of over-assessment and standardized tests? And how can we enhance the e-learning standards after what we've learned in the COVID era? And also Pedro spoke about how the focus of accreditation is always has been on undergraduate programs. How do we accredit, or how do we monitor the learning and learning outcomes in graduate programs outside just the research component? What is the role of professional involvement in accreditation? So if I may start with Dr. Van Damme. Dr. Van Damme, let's begin with you. A minute and a half. If you can keep it to less than 2 minutes, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think I will have to choose between these interesting topics. Let me focus first on the education versus labor market issue. I think that's a really important discussion because among policymakers, and certainly also in the OECD, I see a little bit of an overemphasizing of the labor market demands in terms of skills. And the focus that they put on higher education as just a preparation for the labor market. I think this is not entirely accurate, although I understand it. I think universities have to listen carefully to what the labor market requires, the different signals that employers are sending, but universities also have their own mission. They have a broader, more holistic mission than just preparing for the skills that the labor market requires. So education is also to be seen as something which is constructing societies in a very general sense. So through education in universities, we are preparing the society of the future. We are not just there to meet demands of the external world. That would be my first reaction on the first question. On the second point, the over-assessment issue, I see that. I think this is a risk that is mentioned, but I think there are many inappropriate kinds of assessment. Many quality assurance agencies are still focusing too much on input-related questions, on process-related questions. So the shift towards outcome assessment is not there yet. And that means that quality assurance agencies and accreditation agencies are actually doing too much and imposing too much burden on higher education institutions. I think we collectively should benefit much more from concentrating our efforts on what really matters. And for me, that's outcomes assessment. And we should actually forget about measuring and assessing all kinds of issues which are related to input and process related stuff. But that's a very short and maybe controversial answer to those two questions.
And I will add to this answer, performance task assessment.
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. Dr. Al-Khrayef, we can hear your input on that.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the head of the session. As for the conformity between the needs of the labor market and what is provided for the university education, we need to know are universities just to provide cadres for the labor market, or do universities have other roles to be provided by other countries, or the making of the future, which is very important to consider while conforming the needs of the labor market to the academic outputs of universities. So we need to confirm the idea that countries, especially Saudi Arabia, finance some universities, 28 public universities, which is very important to know as a main driver, not only for universities to provide the cadres for the labor market, but also to provide the outcomes of the university in a way that will not limit themselves to minor challenges. We need universities to contribute to the vision of Saudi Arabia. This is for the first part. As for the second part, which is working in measuring and evaluation too much, this is a dilemma. But if we change our approach so that our goal is not evaluation, but our goal should be improving and in the future, for example, the exit exam, the main goal of exit exam is not to assess the faculty members or the outcomes of the university for students, males and females, but the main goal should be to identify the weakness points and the strength points. And we need to focus on the rooms for improvement in the future. Thank you.
Professor Ciolfi, we can hear your view on that.
Yeah, very rapidly. About the balance between education and job market, I have to agree with Dirk by the fact that what are the job market needs. This is really important and is crucial for policymakers, but we have to remember that the role of the universities is primarily to build good citizens. And this goes behind what are the needs, the actual needs of the labor market. And another role of university is to create innovation. And this goes have a look in the future. This gives a look in the future, not at the current and actual labor market. About the overassessment, it is real. I think this is due to the level of maturity of the higher education system. So, for instance, once you have some basic concept of the assessment, of the self-assessment, of quality assurance that are taken by the university system, you can gradually reduce the burden in terms of self-assessment reports, for example, and other processes that are given to and asked to higher education institution. And this could be also, on the other hand, done by building integrated databases. At least e-learning, well, the assessment of e-learning is really a challenge because you should put that at the same level of the, let's say, traditional learning, but this is not also something that has to do to technological issues, but also methodological issues. It's another way of doing teaching and learning. And the role of the assessment should be, in my opinion, as a first thing to build trust about this different kind of teaching and learning. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Pedro, we can hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, I agree with actually several things that have already said. I think we need to be careful in terms of the emphasis on this very close link between higher education and the labor market, not only because higher education has purposes that are not restricted to producing graduates to the labor market, but because even from a labor market point of view, a very short term, a very narrow perspective about what are the needs of the labor market, I think would be detrimental to the graduates and to the education system in the long term. So I would be careful about this. I think universities should not be deaf to the needs of the labor market. They should not ignore the needs of the labor market, but at the same time, we shouldn't put this relationship so reactive, so mechanical in a way that I think would be damaging in the long term for the sustainability of the system. The second quick note that I would emphasize is that in this articulation between the labor market and the higher education system, we should also allow for diversity. We should allow for institutions that want to have a strong academic profile and others that have a stronger professional profile. What I think is important from a quality perspective is that you assess institutions on the basis that what they say they want to do. And if they say that they want to develop good quality programs with a strong academic orientation, that they are assessed on that, from that perspective. If they say they want to be good in terms of training professionals and have a stronger vocational orientation, then we assess them in terms of what are the good benchmarks in that respect. And I think that is relevant. Third quick note, as Alberto was saying, I think one of the major purposes of quality assurance is to build trust, and to build trust within the system and also in the relationship between the system and society. And I would say that this trust is also very important the more you move into different cycles of evaluation. So you don't want to control the institutions, because the capacity to control institutions by going there every 5 years or every 6 years or every 4 years is very limited. You want institutions really to take this as their responsibility, in a sense to create what we often call a quality culture. And the final remark about graduate evaluation. I think we need also to be prepared that the more we expand graduate education, also the profile of graduate education will diversify. We will not be having graduate programs just to train future academics, future researchers, as traditionally happens. But the more we expand graduate education, we need to train doctors, for instance, to go to the business sector, to go to industry, to go to the public sector and qualify those sectors. That means that the degree of competencies, the criteria, the panels, the process of evaluation also need to internalize this diversity in terms of graduate education, the multiple profiles of graduate education. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think this touches on the context specific and the involvement of the professional bodies that Dr. Sohail has spoken about. Can you allude to this, Dr. Sohail, and comment on the three questions?
Sure, thank you. It's a very interesting question. If you allow me, I might disagree with some of these comments. I think what Dr. Pedro, I think, mentioned regarding the standardized test or the details of the standardized test that's specific for each country. I would take that example and apply it as well for the balance between job market and academia. I think it's really related to the maturity of the whole higher education ecosystem in each country. There are many socioeconomic reasons that take into consideration whether should we be more market, I would not say market driven, but market sensitive. And this is the word that I use in my slides. I would say an example. We were aware when we were designing this academic accreditation council, because the representation in these councils, it's a well balance between academia, between professional entities, as well as the market representative from public or private entities. So it's not yes or no. It's not either fully to be market driven, but the market sensitivity, and really to make sure, as Dr. Abdulrahman mentioned, is if all of our universities they are not, I would say, the return of investment of all of the investment that the government is providing. What's the return of investment on the country for the economic development? So this is what we are trying to say. So it's not specifically the word market or labor market need. It's the economy, how these institutions are helping the economy. We have included in our ranking system, for example, entrepreneurship rate, the percentage these graduates have contributed to the economic development. So we added multiple aspects in addition to the exams. For the e-learning standards, I agree with the speakers. When we reviewed our accreditation standards, we noticed that, and we did benchmarking in many countries, the entities who are doing the quality assurance of traditional training and e-learning training, they're the same. They're the same entities. What we have here as an extra layer, which is unique in the kingdom, we have this national e-learning center. So they will do the licensing, but the quality assurance we will manage these exactly how we are dealing with the quality assurance in other traditional programs.
Wonderful. Doctor, today I would like to thank the Education and Training Evaluation Commission for giving us this opportunity to learn not only about the transformation and the policy reform in higher education here in Saudi Arabia. Clearly, there is a strategy, a national-wide strategy, and there is an alignment between the Ministry of Education and the National Accreditation Agency here in Saudi Arabia, focused on the outcomes. We've also listened to wonderful experiences from the OECD that presented an international study and a new tool that I see as a disruptive innovation in the process of accreditation, and I hopefully see a wider application of this tool to allow for comparability. I know it's context specific, but it can be used to inform decision-making in the future. We've also heard the wonderful experience from Italy. It's not mandated, it's not a legislation, yet we see the pattern of increased participation across institutions and students in Italy, which shows the value and the social value of the accreditation. We've also heard from Dr. Pedro the differentiation and the importance and relevance of accreditation in the private sector and how we can evolve from there, and some of the very important questions that needs to be addressed. Last but not least, I think the constant question that's always in the minds of academics, officials, ministries, legislators: how can the data driven or gathered through the accreditation processes be used to improve students' learning and program learning outcomes? I think this is the $100 million or billion dollar question that really needs to be addressed. We always, as Dr. Van Damme spoken about the process, and where we were always focused on the process and the processes and the forms and the generics. Now we're driven to the outcomes with such plethora of data. If I can get 30 seconds, final thought, your message to academics, legislators, universities, accreditation entities, ministries, how can we use this data to drive learning outcomes in academia? Doctor, I'll start with Dr. Van Damme. Last 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. I think the general message to quality assurance and accreditation agencies is be as simple, but be as goal-oriented as you can be. I think there is still too much overload in higher education quality assurance. We can make procedures much simpler and much more cost-effective with less burden on higher education institutions, but we should also be more targeted, goal-oriented. And for me, the move towards outcome-based assessment is still too hesitant. We should move much more quickly into the kind of procedures, and I'm giving only one example, but there are probably other approaches. I don't claim to have the monopoly, but let's say this society, the outside world, the students are interested in assessing what actually the contribution is of higher education to their skills development. And let's focus quality assurance on that.
Thank you. Dr. Sohail?
Yes, as I mentioned in my slide, the
30
quality,
seconds.
the quality 4.0, we actually started. We started this with the help of the Digital Transformation Department, and we have in mind like the API to have direct connection with the universities to provide their data automatically if they don't like to fill forms. So this will be automatic provision of data. Otherwise, we'll do the traditional way. But I think we're getting there. We have that planned in a time frame, inshallah.
Thank you. Dr. Ciafelli?
Yes, very briefly about data. I think the keyword is, one of the keywords is transparency. There's a need to, of course, collect data from different aspects, and so have an holistic view of what higher education is doing and how they are performing. But it's important to share them, communicate. Why are you doing something? Why are you assessing that thing or another thing? So this is really what makes and builds trust between all the stakeholders in the higher education system.
Thank you. Dr. Pedro?
Yeah, I basically agree with what I said. I'll just emphasize one thing. I think one of from the experience that I have with many universities and many systems is that I think there is a very strong emphasis nowadays in collecting a lot of data, but there is an insufficient attention and reflection about those data and the implication, both at the system level and at the institutional level. I would say that it's important, of course, to have data. I think it's important that decisions are based on data, but maybe we should emphasize less a very exhaustive collection of data and spend more time trying to understand what these data are telling us about the system and about the institution, and then to act in a consequential way according to that data. And I think that link between data collection and management and data collection and strategy, I think is missing in many institutions and in many systems. And I think we should emphasize more this rather than having a proliferation of data that at the end is hardly useful, and that I think distracts the attention of the institutions and the systems.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Dr. Al-Khrayef.
Thank you very much. We now live in an era of technology, and the technology of preserving information and the availability of information is huge, and this may affect quality directly. So I say that today, with the complementation of an integration of devices used for educational services or devices used for monitoring and inspection, or other devices that are used in evaluation. So sharing data is important for taking decisions that are based on evidence. The most important challenge that we face in terms of sharing and using data as tools for quality is the quality of data itself. So we need to focus on the quality of data in order to have evidence-based decisions.
Thank you very much. On behalf of all the viewers, I would like to thank our esteemed speakers, and really big applaud for your informative presentations today. And I would like to thank the Education and Training Evaluation Committee for this amazing opportunity. And I'd like to thank our viewers for listening and for their valuable input. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Ma salam. Shukran.
شكرا معاليكم. Thank you, Your Excellency. شكرا لحسن استماعكم. بهذا تنتهي جلستنا هذه. نلقاكم بعد قليل في جلسة بعنوان الإفادة من بيانات التقويم من خلال البحوث والتقارير في تمام 4:20 مساء بتوقيت الرياض، 21:20 مساء بتوقيت Greenwich. Thank you for your participation. We conclude this session, and we will meet you again after a short break at 4:20 p.m. Riyadh time, 1:20 p.m. Greenwich time, for a session titled Assessment Data for Research and Reporting. Thank you.